Hello, Victoria, and welcome to the Do Good and Do Well podcast. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you, Sarah, for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. It's lovely to meet you, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation. So first off, tell us about yourself. What do you want people to know about you?
Well, I am a writer. I write about contemporary art. I also have a podcast, and I'm a teacher. I work in international education, so at higher education level. So yeah, I'm all of those things. I suppose I'm really interested in what people think and why they think those things. I'm interested in questioning ideas and the assumptions and beliefs that we live by, and that's what I write about via the lens of art. Um, I guess when the feedback that I get the most from my writing is that it's thought provoking, which is for me, I guess, the ultimate brilliant. Because if I were to describe what my writing is broadly about, I would say it's about the way in which power circulates in our world, and how it operates, the dynamics of power. And I'm really interested in politics and contemporary events, stuff that's going on in the world. So I write about that. I speak about that. I teach that, and I just like to have discussions about what's going on, and kind of look at things from different angles.
Mm, yeah. How did you kind of arrive in this place where, it's clear that that idea of being thought-provoking and having discussions around what's happening in the world through a contemporary art lens, how did you arrive here?
Um, Partly just I suppose the influence of my dad. He died last year, and we always had the most amazing conversations. I'm broadly left of center, and he was right of center, and we always kind of had these interesting discussions where I would come at him with something, and he would just give me, in the most kind of generous and thought-provoking way, another perspective. And so I've come from that. All of my life I've been kind of in conversation with one person, seeing another view. But I guess the art stuff comes from, I did my undergraduate degree in history of art, and then started my career. I worked for, back in the early 2000s, this is showing my age, I worked for an art gallery, a .com art gallery, part of that kind of bubble, of the early 2000s, when, there was all of this kind of excitement around .coms, and a lot of them went bust. And in fact, that one did. But I kind of got started in the art world from that, and then I moved into marketing in the arts sector. So I was marketing quite difficult to sell contemporary arts events, dance, world music, contemporary opera, all the hard stuff. But it was really kind of interesting, because pretty much every night of the week in London, I was going to some amazing new
Mm.
show or event. So I've sort of been steeped in um, the arts right throughout my career. And then I got to the end of my 20s, and I just thought, I need to do more. I need to go back to studying. So I did an MA. I did an MA in the history of design at the Royal College of Art. And from that, I just started. I fell into teaching. I started to teach in higher education in London, teaching art students about critical and contextual studies, basically the sort of essay part of fine art degrees or design degrees, the bits that most artists don't enjoy. But I sort of, I got into that, and then I started a PhD, which ended up just being a social history project, but it did start off being a kind of design history project. And I've sort of done that ever since, really. So that's how that's where the art element comes into it. I've just sort of been steeped in visual culture. And when I'm thinking about what's going on in the world, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen, my way of receiving information is largely through listening to radio, listening to podcasts, and reading. I don't watch much TV. I just find myself thinking about artists who have, who are addressing those issues in different ways. They kind of bring alternative perspectives to debates, and I think that's sort of quite interesting, really. Like the artists are able to frame things in a way that is beyond words because it's visual, but quite often can hit, don't know how, very powerfully, a kind of an emotional connection that is very persuasive. And so, yeah, I'm sort of tying all of these things together. It's taken a while, though, to really kind of understand what I'm doing. I do lots of things, but this is the Gallery Companion, which is my blog and my podcast, has evolved over time, and it's become this thing which really fills a lot of my head. And although I also do other stuff, I just find myself needing to express ideas in a certain way through writing and through speaking, that give another perspective, really.
There's so many things I want to ask you. Well, first of all, I suppose I wanted to just take a moment to think how powerful that was, like for you and your dad to be able to kind of have those conversations, and for you to be held in that way that was non-judgmental, and that you could both get curious together. I mean, what a gift. That kind of made me go so tingly when you talked about that. And I really enjoyed the way that you talked about these sort of the things that are driving you, and how you have come to this point, how your career has been steeped in art, and then when you talked about how artists can present a different perspective, and sometimes it's not about how we logically think about it or consciously think about it, but it can get you right in the gut and make you feel a certain way. And it really excuse me, it really reminded me of the work that I did in my community art socially engaged days, where we would work with artists to talk about things like love and hope and connection and kindness, to make it more impactful and help people to feel those things through art. So that totally resonated. Everything you said then really, really resonated. I'm really curious about this idea, you're kind of, I'm hearing this need, I suppose, for you to put these ideas across. And I wonder what's your why? What are you hoping to achieve through that, both perhaps for yourself, but also for a wider audience?
Well, I guess for myself, I've always found that the process of writing helps me kind of sift through different moral positions, and it helps me to kind of clarify what I actually think about something. And so one of the recent stories that I wrote about was the kind of proposed legislation on immigration that's currently going through the House of Parliament, put forward by our Tory government. And obviously immigration is a really hot topic, one that absolutely divides opinion. And what I wanted to be able to do was to talk with absolute clarity about what I thought about Suella's, kind of legislation. And that involved looking at that legislation and what exactly is being proposed. And, that for me is a really valuable thing for me to do. That's what I get out of it. So I can just say, okay, no, I really I'm not gonna there's a lot of hot discussion, and I don't want it to be surface level for me personally. I want to talk with authority about what I think and why. And that's always been something that I've valued. So writing has always really been an important thing for me. What do I hope other people will get from it? Ways of thinking differently about something, about a subject, an opportunity to just to have your thoughts provoked, to challenge people's thinking on subjects. I suppose I come from because I come from a teaching background, like that's what I do all the time. I put forward ideas for discussion, and I'm absolutely not interested in going, it's like this is what you should think. What I want to do with my writing is and my podcast is to get people to sort of see two sides of a story, because there always are two sides of a story, aren't there? And again, just going back to my dad, he would move me, and I certainly moved him in the way that he thought. And I think, at the moment in our current political discourse or public discourse about stuff, there's so much alienation, isn't there? And there's so much dismissal, and there's so much shutting down. And actually, subjects are not black and white. There's never a clear answer. Things are uncertain. And I put forward ideas, but I also try and present other ideas as well, and ask people to respond to it. I always finish with an invitation to kind of share your thoughts on the subject, and I want to know what people think, and I respond to what people think as well. It's not just a sort of invitation, you respond and then it goes out into the ether. I always respond to everyone. So it's and I've learned so much from doing that. I mean, I've learned so much from doing that in my teaching, and that has kind of I think come through in my writing as well, in the way that I want to engage and have my thoughts challenged, or have other people tell me a different perspective. One of the really interesting podcasts that I've listened to most recently, and that you may have heard of it, is a podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling, and it's hosted and presented by a journalist called Megan Phelps Roper, who used to be part of the Westboro Baptist Church in America, which was that kind of quite extreme religious group that kind of stands outside I don't know, meetings, with signs saying God hates fags and stuff like that. Just very extreme. And she came out of her extreme position because people continued to very gently probe her and try and show her other sides to a story or an idea, and eventually she kind of got out of it through the kind of gentle persuasion of who were prepared to engage rather than dismiss. And the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling is really her, giving J.K. Rowling an opportunity to sort of talk to her critics, because she's obviously a figure who has become much maligned. So it was just a really kind of interesting debate. And I suppose like all of the things that I write about and what drives me is really about kind of engaging discussion and debate in a respectful way. In a respectful way. Like I do think, when it comes to, when you think, oh God, I don't know, even someone like Donald Trump, he's just beyond the pale. And of course he is beyond the pale, but understanding where he's come from, what his life experiences have been, and what kind of personality he is, can give you a different perspective on why he's saying things, the things that he does, rather than just dismissing the things that he says.
I'd love to dig a little bit deeper on this, if that's all right. Like, I'm really, so you've talked about new perspectives, you've talked about that challenge, you like to be challenged, you like to challenge, there's something about gentle persuasion, moving people from extreme positions. Why is that important to you?
Why is that important to me? It's a good question, and I suppose I do have various answers to that. One, which is, that I'm a gay woman, and have been at the end of not so nice experiences, and including within my own family. And over the years, I've tried various ways to kind of to engage with extremes of position. And when you're hostile, it never works. When you're very reasonable and rational, you see people move and recognize common humanity, the things that we share, rather than the differences that divide us. And I suppose that's why it's sort of ingrained in me, really, to sort of find the find the things that we have in common rather than the things that separate us. Answer your question. I don't know whether it does. You'll probably ask me again and I'll have to think of something.
No, I won't turn this into a coaching session. But I suppose that's the bit that I'm always curious about, what is the driving force for people to do what they do? Because I think if we can really tap into that, then it gives us permission, I suppose, to do the work. If we know where it's coming from within us, we can keep going back to that when it feels really hard. When you're when you're working, you're trying to make a difference, and sometimes it feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall. To go back to, what is it within me that's really driving me? And when we've excuse me, when we've had those lived experiences of not belonging, of being at the end of someone's extreme perspective, I mean, that's where that's where the strength can come from as well.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that I would say is that I've over the years sort of had all the confidence and no confidence.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah. And I know where that comes from. That comes from having had that experience of rejection, and love being based on, well, if you do this, then you'll get this. And what I want to do, certainly my teaching, is to give confidence to my students. Like, I want them to feel like their voice is valid, And you know, in a way, that also drives my you know, my podcast and my writing, is that like I want people to engage with me, and you know, sort of tell me what they think, and let us have a, you know, a conversation where we can both feel very confident that the other is being listened to.
Yeah. Oh, that's so important. You know, I also think from a feminist perspective of being able to, you know, you talked about a voice being valid. There used to be this phrase years ago, and which was something like, um, kind of allowing other voices to be heard, or it was something like that. And it really irritated me, because this position of, you know, we're allowing people at the table, and actually, people already have a voice. It already exists, but they're kind of through kind of wider societal narrative and also individual experiences, that, you know, sometimes they're not speaking. I, you know, work with a lot of clients who have, when I talk to them, I am blown away by what they're talking about, their perspective, what they have to offer, and yet there's something that really holds them back from saying it out loud. And to offer people, to support people in having a confident voice, where there's curiosity and not judgment, is, yeah, that's like you're passing that gift on to your students. That feels really powerful.
I hope so, because that is what, you know, that's the way that I approach my teaching. I hope that is what happens. But yeah, I, you know, we were talking a little bit before we started just about you know, how I got started in writing, and or certainly writing my newsletter, which I've been doing now since, well, when did I start? It's a good question. I started in lockdown, January 2021, just with an Instagram account. And what I knew I wanted to do, and it was really based from my teaching, is that I wanted to put art in a context, you know, contemporary context, where it resonates with people, and doesn't feel like this kind of elitist thing that goes on, that, you know, you sort of, if you don't understand it, that, or you don't, you know, sort of feel like you're a bit sort of, you're missing the point, or a bit stupid or something. And you know, my students, I largely teach American students who come to London as part of their undergraduate degrees, as a sort of international program. It's really interesting. You know, I have worked in the UK, in UK institutions, but the difference between the American and the UK system is huge. And there's a lot more honesty, I think, with American students about what they do and don't understand. And a lot more expectation that you will explain something to them. Whereas in, I think, UK higher education, it's more like, you go and find it out. We can have a discussion about it, but you need to do a lot of the legwork. And you know, through those honest discussions that I have with my students, you know, I find, you know, I understand that there is this kind of real hesitation around certainly contemporary art, you know, conceptual art, as being really difficult to understand. And what I wanted to do was to present art just in all its richness, and what you can get from it if you allow yourself to be unsure, and to sort of live with that uncertainty, but just to listen to the thoughts in your head, right? So even looking at art when you're thinking, I've got no idea what the hell this is about, that in itself is an interesting response. And then the more that you stay with it, the more thoughts will come into your mind. So when I started in January 2021, I was really like, I'd seen that there was this space within writing about art that wasn't there, that wasn't being fulfilled, which is about kind of putting art in a context that makes sense to people. So I didn't know what I was doing. I just started this Instagram account and I gave it this title, The Gallery Companion. And from there, I built I built up a following, and then I was just like, okay, well, I'd like to talk about it like I do with my students. So I started doing these live events, which I called the Art Salon, and people came to that, and we had great discussions. I met some brilliant people who are still, my followers and some of my biggest champions, really. And after lockdown and people started going to galleries again, I stopped doing the live events, but I moved into doing much more kind of concrete stuff online. So I started up a membership through a platform called Mighty Networks. That kind of didn't work. I did that for about 6 months, and then I had to just knock it on the head because I wasn't getting enough. It was behind a wall, and people couldn't necessarily see what was going on behind that wall. They just had to take a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And that for me didn't work out because, if you've got to take that leap of faith, you're probably not gonna. So I came out that and I thought, okay, well, I'll write on Patreon, which is another, kind of writing and kind of membership platform. And again, that was behind a wall. And so I just didn't, I did that for about 3 months. And eventually I found Substack, which is a writing platform, a writer's platform. It's a newsletter platform, basically. And it's a growing, it's a company that's growing quite rapidly. And it's just the most brilliant space to write. You don't need to, there's loads of newsletters that are just like once a month or, every other week, or what I publish every other week. But it's just, it's professional. It looks great. I started to build a following. You can see who opens your messages. I could see, who was commenting and stuff. And it started slow. It started really slow. It still is kind of slow, but it's not what I mean is it's not massive. I've not got a massive following. But when I moved to Substack, I had about 500 people on my mailing list, and that was September last year. And I've now got 3,500. So
that's incredible.
It's
That's
good.
Great. 3,500 heartbeats.
Yeah. They don't all open my emails, of course, but you can see who opens your emails. But I think having started really small, it enabled me to build my voice and my confidence. And I could see the responses were coming in that were very positive, and I was just like, okay, and it built and built and built. The point about Substack, not that they're not paying me, by the way, is that they have a built-in network that enables you to grow your mailing list by kind of internal systems where you get recommended to other people, and other people can recommend you. There are ways they kind of they send out targeted newsletters to you based on what you enjoy reading and so on, so you can pick up new followers without even really doing anything, which is how I've grown.
And how brilliant, where where it feels like you're not having to, because I think I said earlier that I really love hearing that story, because I think there can be a lot of fear around this idea of writing a newsletter, like who's going to read it, who cares about what I think, I'm not a good writer, all the things. And actually that when I first started my newsletter, I just thought about writing to one person, and it's if I'm just writing to this one person, and then it's grown gradually from that.
Yes, and I think that's a really good way to think about it, is if you think about your ideal reader, or your ideal listener, and just speak to them.
Yeah.
And I do that. I have one person.
Mm.
I haven't told her that she's been with me from the start. I have one person that I write for,
Mm.
and I like I think to myself, okay, is this accessible enough? Is this interesting enough? Will this, meet, will she open this?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And and well, she does, but also, that's a really useful way to think about it. It's not about how many people open your emails, because that's just chasing. That's a disappointment. That's just
Yeah.
chasing numbers.
Yeah.
Forget it.
Yeah.
I used to think to myself, okay, how can I make money from this? How can this, this is a part of my week that I am essentially unpaid for.
Mm.
I pay the bills through doing other things, partly teaching, partly other things. But I used to think, how can I make this pay? And I've stopped thinking about that, and it's freed me up from, kind of chasing down numbers or caring about who opens it, or any of those things. It's just literally a writing practice, and it's for me and for my one reader that I
Yeah.
sort of think, what will you think about this?
Yeah. I love
What
that.
will you get from this?
Yeah. Mm.
It's about the value that it brings to me,
So
really.
you got a little bit more freedom from taking out that question of how can I make money from it? Do
Yeah.
you make money from it? Is it monetized? Because like with Substack, you can have different levels of payment or something, can't you?
Yes, you can.
I mean,
Well, Patreon, you can have different levels of
okay,
payment.
okay,
With Substack, you can switch on paid subscriptions, and you'll either pay, there's a monthly or an annual, which you can set at whatever you want to set at. I do make some money from it, but it's not enough, not nearly enough to pay the bills.
yeah,
So that I just quite quickly realized that wasn't good, unless I had 300,000 followers. I just don't think that's really kind of, and I don't, and I won't ever have 300,000 followers, you know what I mean? So I just sort of quickly thought that I'm not going to waste my time worrying too much about that. And when I get paid subscriptions, it's always a joy, and it's like, oh, but I do say, I used to produce, I used to publish twice a week, and that just became way too much. I was doing, one public post and one post for paid subscribers, and I just sort of thought, this is so unmanageable. And one thing that I've really learned from this whole process is that you have to do what's manageable for you, and not worry about the things that you're not doing. I know that I could get a lot more coverage, a lot more followers, if only I could get to my marketing plan. But I actually don't have enough time in the week at the moment to, and it's just when I let it stresses me out. When I let go of that, at the moment I'm just thinking, well, I'm going to do one thing every week to try and kind of spread the message, and maybe it will work, maybe it won't, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to keep on doing what I do. Otherwise it just becomes too much.
Yeah. I really think that approach, that's a useful approach, a helpful approach, because I think often we can hold things so tightly that sometimes I describe it as like one of those rubber ball bands where you've got one thing and then another thing and then another thing and then this tight rubber ball band, and at any moment it could all just fall apart. And I think sometimes if we can hold it, I think it's tricky when we're surrounded by this, like, be productive, produce, make money, all of this sort of stuff. But if we can hold things a little bit more lightly and just see kind of where it takes us, and I talk about testing a lot, like try it, see if it works. And I can hear that throughout how you described, well, I tried Mighty Networks, that didn't quite work for me. I tried this platform, didn't like that, moved into this, and actually I found, and I think sometimes we feel like we have to make a decision and do that thing, and we're bound to stick to that thing forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And
No.
actually, it's not true. You know, you can just give things a go and, you know, try writing a newsletter, see how it goes. It might not be your thing. It might be a podcast. It might be social media. It might be face-to-face networking, the way that you're kind of, the way that you connect with others. And I think these conversations are really important to have, so that talking about our why and purpose, but also the nitty-gritty of how we get that word out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it is important. Of course it's important, because you know, I spend all of this time thinking about these things. I write and I edit, and you know, it takes hours and hours and hours of my time. And sometimes I just think to myself, why the hell am I doing this? What am I doing this for? But you know, when I really think about it, why am I doing it? I'm doing it because I enjoy it. I enjoy writing, because, as I said before, it helps me kind of sort through what I think myself. It, you know, it makes me think, and I just also think, okay, I don't know what opportunities are going to come from this. Something might come from this, and you know, opportunities have come from it. You know, I've been approached by artists to do writing for them. You know, other, like, I started my podcast because I thought, well, okay, you know, a lot of the people who follow me are artists. And you know, from my own experience of teaching artists, I would find ways to present them with texts and reading that did not involve them reading it. So listening to it, because artists are visual. They like to, you know, they're much more comfortable, and I think a lot of artists are a lot more comfortable in that visual sphere. So I would find documentaries for my students to watch. I'd find podcasts for them to watch. I'd find, you know, and I just thought, okay, well, I'm speaking to artists, give them a podcast, because, you know, and loads of my artists, loads of my followers have, so I love listening to it. I listen to it in the studio while I'm, you know, when I'm working, or, you know, just really, you know, has enabled me to, as I've been doing this, I've learnt from experience. So you can't know everything at the start. And you just, I think all entrepreneurs, I don't know whether I'd call myself an entrepreneur, but you know, you have to be nimble and fleet of foot and move on, and see what works and try different things. And I've tried so many things. And
me too.
yeah, and you know, with the podcast, it's just, I love it now. That's where I'm putting a lot of my attention and my focus, because that has the potential, I think, to reach a much wider audience than a newsletter. You know, podcasts are having massive investment in them. I went to an event for podcasters, for the podcast industry in London a couple of weeks ago.
Was it the podcast show? Yeah, I didn't go, but no.
It was so good. It was so interesting. I could only go on one. It was a 2-day event. I could only go to one of the days, but it was so interesting. I mean, such a buzz around podcasting, and you know, investment in voices, like unheard voices, and that, like I was saying to you before, is a bit of a wild west, you know, where you can be you're just, you know, somebody who doesn't have a huge following, and then, you know, kind of build an audience in it, you know, it, and there's massive listenership numbers now, and it's only increasing rapidly. So, you know, I just sort of thought, okay, well, I'm not, you know, one of the things that I went to this event at the podcast show, which was like a marketing seminar. How do you market your podcast? Great, okay, I'll go to that. And these two American women come to talk about they do marketing for podcasts, and they basically said, look, you know, social media is fine, but social media, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, then those are not going to be your listeners particularly, because they're they're quickly flitting through, and they're not going to go, oh, is it podcast? Let me click onto that. Let me click onto that, and let me go and listen to that. No, they're there to just sort of do the kind of. So if you're focusing on your social media for podcasting, you need to think again. And I was just like, oh wow, okay. I just totally, I had been spending a lot of time on social media, like trying to build an audience through social media, and actually that's not where I'm going to find my audience. There are other ways to market for your podcast, of which they gave me loads of really useful tips.
Yay,
so
good.
Yeah, it's just adapting and moving and thinking about where your customers, where your clients, where your followers, where your listeners are going to be.
Yeah, exactly. There are two things. I was just thinking how amazing I would have loved you as a teacher when I did my degree, because I think coming from, I was the first person who went to university in my family, wasn't massively academic, although had the good girl syndrome, like worked my arse off to get my A's and all of the things. But it was so it was aimed at one particular learner, someone who's happy to read books. And anyway, so first of all I was thinking I'd like to be taught by Victoria. And then the second thing I was thinking is, I can imagine artists listening to your podcast, your voice. We just take a moment to, like, you're so calming and like have this amazing way of articulating things. And I think everyone needs to go and listen to Victoria's podcast.
Please do.
Just like wandering around listening to your voice, I'd be like, oh, amazing.
Do you know what, Sarah? You're not the first person to say that, and actually, it's only sort of emerged, that knowledge for me has only really emerged in the last couple of years when I've been, doing the Gallery Companion. People have said to me, "Gosh, your voice," and I'm just like, "What? What do you mean?" But it's obviously a thing. So
you should do some mindfulness training or something, because I can imagine you could do mindfulness in galleries, walking around, being present with the artwork, and just
good idea. Yeah.
Chilling out.
I tell you what, the other thing about my voice is that it's quite soporific. I mean, I definitely, send my wife to sleep. So as soon as I start talking, when we're in bed, as soon as I start talking, she's asleep within 5 seconds. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. So I wanted to ask you, the name of the podcast is Do Good and Do Well, and I wonder what arises for you when you hear that phrase.
I was thinking about this in advance of our chat, actually, and I was thinking about the people who have influenced me most in my working life, in my professional life, and just in my life in general. I mean, I've mentioned my dad before, but I think I would characterize those people as having a profound generosity, generosity of a spirit, and and generosity of heart. People who've influenced me and continue to influence me, actually. And for me, one of the people who has influenced me professionally the most was my PhD supervisor, Professor Matt Cook. And he's an historian of sexuality and queer history. And it took me 7 years to do my PhD. I did it part-time, and we, for that length of time, had a couple of gaps in my study, but I'd meet with him every couple of months for 2 hours to talk about some writing that I'd done for him. And in that 2 hours, there was nothing else in the world. It was just him listening to my ideas and responding to what I was saying, and valuing what I was saying, really carefully listening, I think. And his academic generosity was just so blindingly clear to me, and I just thought, I want to be that person who is like who's like that. Ultimately, I think I just want I want to thrive, and I want other people to thrive. I want the people that I work with to thrive, and I want my students to, feel confident and succeed. And I think, that's the way that I try and operate with the people that I work with and interact with professionally. I go into conversations not thinking about what I can get from them, but what I can share, what I can give, what knowledge I have, or things that I found useful and valuable to me that I can share. And I think when you invest in people in that way, they invest in you. And that investment isn't necessarily, immediately there, but it's building a kind of deep connection with people where they trust you and they come back to you and they ask your opinion and they, and they give, and there's a genuine exchange there, which is built on listening to each other.
And how do you, because I think with generosity and investment comes a lot of time and
Yes,
a lot
it
of
does.
energy, and we can end up holding quite a lot for people taking that responsibility. I'm wondering for you how you make sure that you look after yourself within that. So if you're pouring into others, how do you know if it's too much or too little, or what's your thoughts?
It's a really good question. And with my students, I think there is an expectation that there are boundaries there, and I am boundaried in that way. I'll say, you can't speak to me, after class, we can talk about any problems. I'm happy to help you, da da da. But I'm not going to individually teach people, for 5 hours or whatever. And there is just a sort of, I suppose, I don't know how to kind of describe it, but just a dynamic which I will kind of, sort of slightly push back on and ask them to sort of maybe think about this or that, and they need to do the work, and they, so there's that in my teaching. In my professional, in other ways, I don't know what to say really to that, but I guess I just sort of think, is this, when I'm having conversations with people, you kind of figure out the lay of the land in a way, and whether they're listening to you and you're listening to them. And I think that's where I kind of recognize what's going on. If someone is really not listening to you, or what you're saying, then okay, there's not that the relationship probably isn't there, and I just sort of go with my instinct on that, but yeah, I don't know, what do you think about that?
I suppose I think it's being self-aware, that noticing when you might feel drained, depleted by certain conversations, or not even conversations, but even when you're thinking about your business, like are there parts of it that it doesn't feel like there's an exchange somewhere, you're pouring into it and you're not really getting anything back, and that can feel quite exhausting. And I think if you can really take a step back and just notice. So you talked about instinct, what is the, how does the instinct show itself? Is it a thought that you have? Is it a feeling that you have? That you talked about noticing if someone's not really listening, and you're kind of, there's not an exchange in a way. I think if we can become more self-aware around that, then we can start making decisions about, is that something I need to stop doing? Is there somewhere else I need to pay attention? I mean, I feel like a lot of stuff just comes from a sense of self-awareness, and in as much as possible, a curious way, not a sort of judgmental way. Oh, I should have done that. I should have done this. But just noticing where your energy comes, where you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that energy is really, really important. And actually, through Substack, going back to Substack again, I've met a few people who, have really, they have that generosity that I recognized in my supervisor, I recognize in my dad, and I think, just going back to that instinct thing, you do notice, and whether when there's an energy between people where they're giving you and you're giving them, and there's a sort of, okay, I think we can learn from each other, and we can invest in each other, and listening to that is I think that's really important. But even in the conversations that you have with people where you think, oh, okay, I'm not sure that this is, I'll still have those conversations just to sort of just to find out. And I don't ever think to myself, oh no, I'm not going to do that. I just try it out. And if it doesn't feel good, then you don't need to you don't need to go back there. But you never know what opportunities are going to come.
Never know. You never know.
You never know what valuable things you'll learn.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also about noticing how you show up in the space as well. What are your needs that are being met in that if we're talking about conversations, what are your needs being met in that in that conversation? And if you've so sometimes it's not about what is happening with the other person, but kind of what is happening with us and what we're trying to get out of it. I don't know where I'm going with this, but anyway, it's but that that
I know what you mean.
That also, I think you said something earlier about feeling more comfortable in a place of uncertainty, and I think that's such a helpful point that you made there, because as humans, we want everything to be certain. We want to know exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and we live in so much uncertainty at the moment. Actually, there's real skill to be able to sit with it and to be able to think, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going to happen in this conversation, but I'm willing to find out. I don't know if that's going to be the service in my business that's suddenly going to make it all sustainable or whatever. I don't know, but I'm willing to kind of sit here in that discomfort a bit and give things a go. And I think that's what I've really kind of got from you in our conversation.
Well, do you know what? It takes a lot of work for me to be okay with uncertainty, because I think I go round and round and round and round and round. And that I can be quite sort of anxious about stuff, but this is where things like, I don't know, paying attention to artists and what they're communicating is really helpful. There's an artist whose work I absolutely love. He's a South African artist called William Kentridge. He had a big show at the Royal Academy a few months ago, and his kind of his line, the way that he sort of makes these kind of animated drawings, they're the line is very uncertain. He'll draw something, he'll rub it out, take a photo of it, rub it out, and it's like there's something uncertain about his line, and he talks about that uncertainty in the wider world. Like, nothing is certain, everything is uncertain, and people who are certain, you got to be very worried about them. And he comes from this this kind of context and background of apartheid South Africa. And he says, people who are certain, they'll line up with their guns and they'll say, it's this way, follow me. Otherwise, and it's getting those sorts of really insightful perspectives that show up through art that I think is, kind of you know, it allows you to think about ideas in a slightly different way, you know.
Yeah. I was just thinking, which is why it's awful that there's such a lack of investment in, you know, arts and creativity in the UK, but that's another podcast.
Well, it's another podcast, and actually, well, we should talk about it another time, actually, because I have done a recent blog post on the value of teaching art in schools. How we should, you know, kind of invest in or trying to reverse. It was based around I don't know whether you remember Rishi Sunak's recent you know, we've got to reverse the anti-maths mindset, blah blah blah, and I'm just like, well, how about reversing the anti-arts mindset? Because you know, kids will learn a lot more if you invest in art. You don't need 2 more years of maths education. You need to think about how we're teaching maths, and you know, kind of rethink, you know, methods of teaching and learning, which incorporate the, anyway, let's not get started. But yeah.
Oh, what a rich conversation. Thank you so much. How can people find out more about you? So how can they find this newsletter, get to your podcast? I mean, I'll put the links in the show notes too, but share the info.
Yeah, my Substack is at thegallerycompanion.com. The podcast is just called The Gallery Companion. You can get it on Apple or Spotify, or, you know, any major podcast player. But there's also a link to that in every post that I post out. So every couple of weeks, I'll send out a newsletter, and it has all of the images and the videos and stuff that I talk about in the podcast. So it's a sort of companion to the podcast. But the links are always in there. So yeah, subscribe at thegallerycompanion.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah.
I've really enjoyed it.
Me too.
Take care.